Thank you and welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish. Today is Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023. And as always, we're gathered to do this work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. Could I have someone move adoption of the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Stoner. All in favor? Motion carries. Please be advised that this council meeting is being live streamed, recorded, and will be available to the public to view on the District of Squamish website following the meeting. If you have concerns, please notify the corporate officer present at the meeting. And we're on to item 3.1, which is a staff report of Valleycliffe Childcare Project Lease Agreement. I'll pass it over to staff.
Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Sarah McJanet, Community Planner and Childcare Liaison with the district, and with me here is Nab Triplett with Real Estate. The purpose today before you is to bring forward a lease agreement with the Board of Education of School District 48 Sea to Sky, SD 48, for land at Valleycliffe Elementary School for the childcare partnership project. So our purpose is to seek council authorization today. This project advances our OCP goals and objectives to increase the supply of childcare spaces within Squamish, and also partnership building with School District 48, which is identified as a key action in our childcare action plan. There we go. As a recap, this is a joint partnership agreement between the District of Squamish, SD 48, as well as Sea to Sky Community Services as the not-for-profit long-term childcare operator. The district has been the lead. The District of Squamish has been the lead applicant to obtain the Childcare BC New Spaces funding, and with the successful funding award, our role has been to administer the grant and manage the project build-out, the subleasing of the space to the operator. So in addition to the $2,100,000 awarded in March 2022, we were successful in obtaining additional $526,374 in March of this year. That was additional cost to the project due to cost escalation. We signed an amendment. Grant is providing 100% of the capital funding, and the District of Squamish has been contributing towards early site investigations required for the project over time, as we've been applying multiple times to get to a successful award. And just lastly, to note, this project, the funding that is being provided through the Childcare BC funding requires a 15-year minimum operating period for the childcare, and that's a commitment to that long-term operation of the facility and maintenance of existing after-school childcare spaces at Valleycliffe Elementary. In terms of our timeline and our progress, this is an updated graphic. We are midway to completing final detailed design in preparation for building permit submission and tender so that we can get going with construction starting mid to late summer. And we will work through the fall and into the winter with anticipated completion and licensing in Q1 of 2024. So our cars are all lined up, ready to go. And I'm going to turn it over to Nav now to speak to the lease agreement. Sorry.
Thanks, Sarah. So between the three partners, there's various agreements that are required. In front of council today, we have the ground lease, which allows the district to construct the facility on the school district lands. Because the ground lease requires ministerial approval, because it's a disposition of over 15 years or a substantial amount of time, we need an interim agreement to execute, which will be done at the staff level, because that could take a few months for the ministry to get back to us and allow signing of the document. And then in terms of CSI Community Services, the district will have a partnership agreement with them, which lays out the terms and conditions of the services that they need to provide. And we will be doing a sublease agreement with them. And then that allows them to use the facility. And then the school district has to provide landowner consent for that agreement. We are hoping to bring back the remaining agreements potentially in beginning of the fall. Okay. Just to show on the screen there, on the left side, the lease area is highlighted in red. And then on the right side, we've kind of shown potentially where the building will go. And the drawings are being finalized, but that's a rough idea of where it will go. In terms of the lease, the key terms that we've negotiated is a lease area of approximately 1,400 square meters, a term of 17 years, 15 years is the operating, as Sarah mentioned, that's the minimum required in the funding agreement, and the 2 years gives us plenty of time to construct the facility. We've also negotiated a 6-year option to renew, and with a nominal fee of $1. As mentioned, we do need ministerial approval before the school district can sign the lease agreement. There has been plenty of consultation with the neighbors, and that will continue through the construction phase as well in terms of hours of construction and days and things like that, and how we can mitigate those concerns. And that will be in line with the construction mitigation policy. And again, there's a deadline in the lease agreement that we will finish commencement of the facility within 2 years. As such, we have 3 motions for council to consider. Firstly, we are looking for endorsement of the lease agreement substantially in the form attached to the council report, as well as authorization for the mayor and corporate officer to execute once the final version has been approved by the CAO. And we've also asked that any administrative matters or amendments in the future can be delegated to staff. And with that, we will turn it over to mayor and council.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Council, questions on this one? Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, we've probably gone over these 2 things at some point, but I'm just wondering if you can remind me, pardon me, or clarify. I can understand our involvement at the start, but after construction and so on, once it's in operations, I'm wondering why we wouldn't just have the Sea to Sky Community Services have an agreement with the school board and us sort of be out of the picture.
Through the mayor, the question around the ongoing operation of the childcare. So in terms of the lease agreements and the partnering agreement, so there's a partner agreement that the district will have that's under development with Sea to Sky Community Services to deliver the childcare services within the constructed building. So that's for them to obtain the licensing, maintain all the requirements for the childcare facility, pay rent, and fund the operation over the long term, per the funding agreement that we have with the province. So we step back and that once that partner agreement is in place. And then there's also a sublease. So there's a with the school district, based on the requirements, we have a head lease essentially with the school district, and then we sublease that lease area in the building out to the long-term operator. So we step back at that point. That's clear, hopefully.
Yeah, okay, thanks. That helps me understand. The other piece, I'm just wondering, looking at the timelines of the lease and so on, is this building constructed as a portable or semi-portable building? It sounds like we have a max of 21 years of lease after construction, or is there an expectation that this will go on much past that, but we'll just have to renegotiate a lease at that point?
Thank you for the good question. For clarity, through to council, the purpose, this is a purpose-built building in contrast to the temporary-ish buildings that you typically see on school district properties with portables as student populations kind of expand and contract. This is a purpose-built building that will be erected and have a long lifespan. And so we will, in future, once the agreement term comes to an end, we will continue our discussions with the school district around their renewal or other opportunities to reassign. The public funding that's come in through the province for this building is in support of that community early learning use on a school district site, which is in line with our childcare action plan. And so we're continuing on that basis. And in 20 years, when we have we'll reassess the situation for childcare at that time.
Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. I think just following up on Councillor Pettingill's questions, as I read the leasehold improvement section of the agreement, am I correct in thinking that the district owns the building? So we're leasing the land. At the end of 20 years, we are the owners of the building still?
That's correct. We are the owner of the improvements on the land.
Hey, Council, I'm not seeing any other. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
I take it there will be a legal survey still to be undertaken. What accounts for the current shape of the lease area polygon as we have it? And I notice on Schedule A there is a yellow stripe through it. What is the fate of this polygon, and how will the survey perhaps affect that shape? Does it correspond to is there a natural wetland there? Perhaps you might elaborate.
Thank you so much for the question. The shape of the lease area is reflective of the expansion or the building footprint, as well as the setback area to the property line, and also respecting an entry pathway that extends from Hemlock Avenue into the school. And then in addition to the building area, there's an outside child care play area, 2 play areas, in fact, for the infant toddler and the 3 to 5-year-olds. So that lease area is also inclusive of the childcare outdoor play. It's unique in shape also because there are existing child outdoor play features at Valleycliffe Elementary. There's swings and some other exciting play structures that I don't even know how to describe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any other questions. Is someone prepared to move the staff recommendation? Are you moving all, we're gonna move these all together, Councillor Stoner? Are you seconding all together? Okay, so all together, would you like to speak to it?
Just briefly, I know how excited our community is about this project, and it's so exciting to see that it's going forward. Thank you for all your efforts to get the additional funding from the province to make sure that it's happening, and for the figuring out the convoluted path to making sure that all 3 partners can come together and make this collaborative project work. Thanks.
Councillor French?
Thanks. In speaking in favor of the motion, I think that this is a great example of how we're better together, where a number of institutions, organizations have come together to achieve these daycare spaces that are so very much needed in our community. And I'm hoping that moving forward, we'll do more of this, more partnerships, and collaborate to create projects like this one that are great for our community. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments, I'll venture one of my own. Just thank you so much to everyone involved with this process to sort of keep the pressure on and secure the funding. And thanks to the province for sort of seeing the light on that. And I was beyond the complexities of this, that additional layer of just cost escalation by delay was quite both frustrating to see happen, as we all knew this is a need for our community, but also I'm very happy to see that part's been covered here. So I'm looking forward to seeing this in action. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to support all of these motions. So I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much. So, Council, we have 2 adoptions here, which don't come with a staff presentation. Are you moving the first one, Councillor Stoner? And second by Councillor Hamilton. This is the District of Squamish Intermunicipal Transportation Network Services Business License Agreement number 2972-2023 for adoption. I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We're on to the second item here. Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Hamilton. This is the District of Squamish Intermunicipal TNS Business License Bylaw number 2973-2023. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We're on to staff reports. Now, WLNG, Woodfibre, Liquefied Natural Gas, and FortisBC Eagle Mountain Pipeline Projects Memo. Do we need some space for? Does staff need a moment to get set up, or? Yep. Why don't we take a 5-minute recess? So we'll recess 5 minutes. Thank you. Woodfibre, LNG, FortisBC Eagle Mountain Pipeline Projects Memo and update from staff. I'll turn it over to staff.
Good afternoon, Chair and Council. My name is Julie Vengi and I am the Acting General Manager for Community Planning and Sustainability. I am joined by Kate Mulligan, who will lead Council through the following presentation, which will provide an update on the FortisBC Eagle Mountain Pipeline Project and the Woodfibre Natural Gas Project. We are also joined in Council chambers and online by select members of staff who are on hand to share updates and answer questions relating to the projects. I will turn it over to Kate now.
Thank you, Ms. Wengi. Good afternoon, Council, and thank you. My name is Kate Mulligan, and I'm the Economic Development Officer for the District of Squamish. As Ms. Wengi stated, the objective of today's presentation is to summarize activities for the March through April 2023 period related to each aforementioned project. Currently, both projects are in the pre-construction phase. Fortis has indicated that their issuance of a 30-day construction notice is forthcoming, while WNG has proposed a construction start date of August 2023. WLNG must submit their community services and infrastructure plan, management plan to the EAO 60 days before the start of construction and not start construction until the plan is approved. The district is also awaiting a confirmed site plan and construction schedule. In terms of key activities underway, presently, both projects require significant district staff resources. District have been scoping project activities impacting various district departments and identifying those capacity requirements. District staff are currently processing various in-stream applications relating to site preparation and temporary use permits while reviewing various management plans, including WLNG's Community Service Infrastructure Management Plan, Fortis's temporary use applications for the laydown area and lodge, and meeting with project proponents regularly tied to permitting and plan review. Completed activities to date relating to Fortis EGP project include the issuance of 1 building permit and 1 road use permit for government road water supply, as well as the issuance of a DPA1 and tree management permits for site preparation activities. The district has also provided comment on FortisBC's Worker Code of Conduct. FortisBC notified that revisions would not be considered at this time. Completed activities relating to WNG include the issuance of a DPA1 and tree management permits for the WNG site preparation and a building permit for a compressor station retaining wall located at the WNG site. The district also submitted EAO tracking updates related to the WNG project provided to the EAO office in March 2023. Upcoming activities for EGP include several permits, including the in-stream TUP applications for laydown and lodging. Several management plans and agreements are required relating to construction, including but not limited to a traffic control management plan, an emergency response plan, and construction protocol agreements. Many plans identified on the slide have been received in draft and are currently in review by staff. Upcoming project activities related to WLNG include the review of several permit applications relating to the pre- and construction phases and include anticipated applications for a temporary use permit for worker accommodation using a flotel. In addition to permitting, the district anticipates providing feedback on the most recent version of the Community Service and Infrastructure Management Plan and other project-related plans, including an emergency response plan, marine transportation plan, and traffic control management plan. At this time, associated project applications and plan reviews span multiple divisions. Outside of in-stream permits, significant capacity is also required by staff to review complex project-related plans and agreements. Current capacity funding does not meet staff resourcing requirements or operational requirements related to plan review. Staff have identified that additional capacity funding may be required to meet proposed project timelines as expressed by the proponents. And with that, I'll turn it back to council, and happy to take questions, as well as we have many staff on hand to respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Council. Questions? Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. I have a few, and maybe I'll ask Woodfibre for some later as well, the same things. But just on the blasting permit, are we able to, or do we, or how do we handle? My understanding is there's outstanding issues with Henriette Dam above the site, and I'm concerned, and I don't understand all the geotech, but impacts of blasting on this dam, which I understand needs significant remediation, or maybe I'm misunderstanding that. Or is the blasting permit something that we provide, or is that a provincial permit?
I would like to ask my colleague to come and answer the question.
Hello, my name is Sarah Bailey, Director of Engineering. Through the chair, the blasting permit is something that the district provides that falls under our blasting bylaw. Can you repeat the start of the question about the risk to the dam?
Yeah, my understanding is there's some unresolved issues with that dam that puts the site at risk, and there's mitigations required. I'm not sure if this is at the federal, provincial level. There's been some outstanding questions and correspondence, and my understanding is people haven't been able to get very good clarity on where that stands, but my understanding is that is outstanding. Intuitively, I'd be concerned about the impacts of blasting on if a dam needs mitigations and so on above the site. So just wanting to understand what is our expectation or ability to sort of consider some of these things, the impacts of blasting, and understanding how some of these other, risks might relate to that.
I'll try my best to speak to that. Under our blasting bylaw, we require the applicant to have the relevant health and safety requirements, and that they are following the procedures required for that type of work. I don't believe their scope, not to my knowledge, has extended to evaluating the dam. I can ask that question as part of their submission for the blasting permit.
Okay, thank you. And then just shifting gears, you mentioned a number of plans that need to be submitted and so on. Condition 24 of their environmental assessment application requires public engagement on all of these plans. Do you know when the public will see the plans, or when they've last seen this, or when the public has had that sort of engagement opportunity on these plans?
Through the chair, no, that is not something that we have knowledge of.
Okay, thanks. And then the last is maybe just a bit of a comment in it was mentioned that the capacity constraints, and I think it's really important that we separate capacity funding, which makes sense if we're having to do this is taking up a lot of bandwidth. But I think that's separate from the prioritization of this project. And from my experience, this is causing delays in other projects. And from my perspective, giving it a degree of priority that does not match our actual community priorities. And so I want to, I guess, make sure or understand that, that things that we've stated in our strategic planning and that's identified in our CP are actually the things that we are prioritizing instead of work. Because, when we add bodies, that doesn't just sort of allow one thing to move forward in isolation. There's a bottleneck at CLT, a bottleneck in terms of council time, council decisions. So just wanting to make sure that we are not giving this project an unfair level of priority and putting all of our actual community priorities, giving them a backseat because the proponent is interested in moving this on an unrealistic timeline. And so I think it's just really important to make sure the EAO and the proponent is sort of clear that we will work through this in a sort of fair and, reasonable timeline, but they have to understand that we have a bunch of other priorities, very valid priorities that require our attention as well.
Okay. Was there, you're good for now? That was that felt like a comment that didn't, okay. Council, other questions for our staff? Councillor Anderson. And Councillor Anderson, can I get you to turn your camera on? And then the floor is yours. Good, you're good. Go.
A number of years ago, a very large project came to Squamish, namely the university, which became Quest. And at that time, for the scale of the community and district apparatus it was a very complex and challenging one. And new facilitation procedures were arrived at to steer this project through. We've heard from staff that there's a desire to have the proponents consider additional capacity funding to establish a district project management team. No doubt, as with any large developer, there's also interest on their part in an efficient process for the applications, for information exchange, and the general approval process. Has staff given thought to whether it is a new, unique type of team or facilitator position or positions that might be entertained? Would we try something new to achieve this efficient and fair information exchange and application approval process? It's described thus far as a district project management team. Are there any nuances that the staff have been thinking about or exploring for what is really needed?
Through the chair, we have put considerable thought into how a project team would look at the district in relation to this project. Our particular challenge is that it does require a really in-depth knowledge of the area, the proponent, and the work that they're doing. So rather than engaging separate individuals outside the organisation or contracting this team out, the idea is if this project team existed, that would utilise the existing resources of the team, and we would use other resources for the work that we're working on as well.
Thank you. I might have added that during our experience with the university project, it was the Director of Economic Development was seconded in a new office as a facilitator. There were complex zoning, land use, memorandums of understanding, complex for that day. So that was the background to my question, but you've answered it well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Stoner, then Hamilton.
Thank you. Through the chair, thanks to staff for the update and all the work that's been going on. I just have a question about the FortisBC project timeline. In the staff report, it says that they're anticipating construction will commence in the second quarter of 2023. We're almost at the end of the second quarter, and they still haven't given us 30 days notice. So that I think is concerning. But I guess my question for staff is, in the project activities list, there are a number of management plans that still aren't complete. And so I'm wondering which one of those were expected or they are required to have complete. I'm expecting, personally, I would expect like the traffic control management plan, the emergency response plan would hopefully be in a complete phase before they give us 30 days notice of start of construction. But I'm just wondering if that is a shared expectation or not.
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, FortisBC only needs the EAO's approval to be of their management plans to be able to commence construction. So we've been waiting for them. So they have received that approval, contingent upon a number of additional pieces of information that they need to provide us. So they are in a position that they could declare that they are about to commence construction within 30 days at any given point in time. Our expectation is that the information required by the district to understand the impacts of all our activities would be provided to us before that date.
So their traffic management plan, for example, has been accepted by the EAO?
Sorry, no, it has not been accepted by the EAO at this stage.
Do we know if that needs to be accepted by the EAO before they start construction? It does not.
No, it does not. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks. On the FortisBC Eagle Mountain pipeline, the last we interacted, I believe, as a council with them was in February on the temporary use permits for the laydown yard and the workforce lodge, proposed workforce lodge. Council delivered quite a bit of feedback and commentary. Have FortisBC responded to any of that feedback with any substantive changes to their temporary use permit application?
Through the chair, if I could ask my colleague to answer that question.
Could you please repeat the start of that question?
So it was in February of this year. FortisBC submitted the temporary use permits, and that came to council for, it was a committee of the whole for feedback. Have FortisBC considered any of the feedback that council gave at that meeting and made any substantive changes to their temporary use permit application in response to that feedback?
Through the chair, so we did provide Fortis with council's comments, and they did provide responses back. Now we're just in the back and forth process trying to kind of weed out the actual responses that we're going to be providing once we come back to council.
Just as a follow-up, do you know of any substantive changes to their applications that might have resulted from the feedback?
Through the chair, so they have made some changes. I can't speak to the level of the changes at this point.
Thank you. Councillor Greenlaw, then myself, then Councillor Benningham.
Thanks. Through the chair, just seeking a bit of clarification here about the EAO applications and Fortis's stance on being able to begin construction. I just wanted to be clear that they can commence construction prior to them fulfilling the basically amendments to the obligations to their approved EAO application. Is that correct?
Through the chair, if I could ask, Susan Stratus is online and should be able to answer this question.
Hello, can you hear me? I've had to switch laptops here at the last moment.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, it's not a really simple question to answer. The EA process in relation to the management plans has been a bit challenging to follow, even though we've been following it since the beginning. What appears to happen is that the EAO will issue approval, such as the amendment application, with a list of conditions to be fulfilled, such as the management plans. And those management plans often come in a fairly general format and require additional, more detailed plans to be submitted, which the district doesn't necessarily have an approval role in reviewing. So what does end up happening is the EAO will issue approval of the EA amendment with a list of conditions, and those conditions will be worded, for instance, that Fortis has to complete a traffic management plan. But that traffic management plan doesn't stop them. If they haven't finished it yet, it doesn't stop them from proceeding. And I guess that's the really challenging part for us as kind of working with staff to work with the EA and the management plans, is they're somewhat disconnected. I guess in short answer to your question, yes, they can proceed to construction. It's quite different from the municipal process, where normally you would have all those studies reviewed and vetted and approved before any permits are actually issued. But it works differently with these provincial projects, where as long as there's a commitment to complete a study, such as a traffic impact study, they can proceed. So that, it's a challenging review process, I think. And I see it looks unusual. It looks unusual from our end as well.
So is there any kind of timeline obligation for the completion of these studies? Like, could they complete it after construction? There's like, and also sorry, go ahead.
The chair, I think what might be best if I could follow up in writing actually on this to just clarify where each of these plans are and when they're required in relation to the construction activity that is underway. They each have different submission requirements, and I don't have that in a format in front of me. I would only, I guess, generalize by saying each of these projects will be proceeding to construction without the district necessarily having reviewed and vetted all of the detailed management plans and sub-plans that come under each of those. As long as there's a commitment in the EA approval as the condition that they be done, it's not necessarily tied to the municipal permits, for instance.
And is it possible to get a list of which conditions are outstanding?
Yes, it is possible. We can generate that list and kind of put it in a simplified format. I think that's something we'd have to do as a follow-up to this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I had a couple questions came up for me. In the staff report under upcoming actions, under the Woodfibre portion under permitting and licensing, it goes into the DPAs that are outstanding, and DPA 1 is explained and DPA 10 is explained. Could you fill the gap in for me on what DPA 11 is?
Through the chair, DPA 11 is our wildfire DPA, and we just received the wildfire report last week.
Okay, thank you. And that's for the Woodfibre site. Now, some of these things, would they not apply to the temporary use permits? Would there not be similar documentation required as well? I'm just wondering what's sort of captured in that temporary use permit for the laydown yard and the workforce lodge. It says in progress, but I know that there's a lot there. Could you speak a little bit to sort of what those outstanding issues are and if some of these are the same or?
Through the chair, so it'll be two separate wildfire reports. So we have one for the WLNG site and also one for the workforce lodge. We also received that workforce lodge report last week, so we're just in the process of reviewing both reports.
Okay, thank you. And could you and with the, I just want to make sure that we understand what's underneath the temporary use permit category. I think that's a bit of a catch-all and is perhaps oversimplifying what the permit is that staff's working on there. So would those DPAs fall into that? Is the traffic management plan specifically for the workforce lodge TUP captured under that, or should I be looking for it elsewhere on the list? And like just sort of broad strokes, what's captured under that short statement?
Through the chair, so yes, that is correct. So for each specific TUP, there'd be a specific traffic management plan for that, as well as an environmental report and including the wildfire report as well.
Okay, thank you. And the coordinated project activity section of the report seemed a bit light to me on the expectations, or I think it's from my perspective, the coordinated activities of these two entities has been something that we've been asking for an improvement on. Can you speak to the sort of what staff's expectation is of that coordination compared to what is stated here in the report, which is more just that there's joint meetings or people are present at different ones, but versus truly joint planning processes or plans that speak to each other. And these are things that we've had challenges with.
Through the chair. So in relation to the activities that staff undertake on this project, Specifically, a lot of them fall into the single proponent activities. You can see that through the applications, the DPA 1s and DPA 11s, and all of those are processed individually. We do have, and I could ask my colleague, Mr. Valleycliffe, to speak to, there is a coordination meeting that occurs monthly in relation to the permitting.
Thank you. So that is a relatively new process that we've been able to get agreement on with both parties, where there is, I'd say, maybe a new level of coordination when it comes to permitting. But from our understanding from the applicant's perspective, they're still looking at these two as separate projects.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to hear that as it relates to permitting, but as far as taking that out further into planning processes and that type of thing, that's not something that we've seen a substantial change on from a staff's perspective.
Through the chair, no. At the moment, we are continuing to deal with the proponents individually.
Thank you. I have Councillor Pettingill and then Stoner.
Yeah, so first, just picking up some of the conversation where it seems there's a real challenge in terms of making sure we have all the plans in time for feedback, which is required to have an effect on approvals, which seem to come before all this. So I'm looking to staff for some direction on how best to flag this for a minister letter or UBCM discussion. Is that something I can just sort of note now and we'll follow up as we come up to UBCM next year? Or because this seems like something that definitely a sore spot with this project, but is probably broader and more applicable to the EAO process in general. So I'm just wondering how best to flag that. Usually we sort of say, hey, we'd like to talk about this in next September.
Yeah, I
resolution is best. Okay.
Yeah, I think a motion to that effect to refer it to a resolution consideration of resolutions for LMLGA and UBCM would be the path forward there.
Okay, so I will, I know colleagues have questions after, so I will take a second to think about what my resolution will be and let them speak. I do have one more question before I...
Yeah, go ahead with your question.
So just picking up on some of the pieces that we've discussed, from my perspective, I've seen a greater resistance to coordinate the projects. We're looking back at previous videos, there's acknowledgement, oh yeah, we need to coordinate better. And now at more recent presentations, I've seen the proponents are even, if anything, more resistant to working together. But I'm wondering how much then, because at the same time, they're asking us to, meet their very accelerated timelines when they've been sort of silent for a long time. So how much of our workload and effort and what's taking up our capacity is actually managing the coordination of these two projects and understanding the cumulative impacts, because they haven't done that planning. They're refusing to do it, and yet they want us to sort of hurry up and hurry up and hurry up. So is this something where if they actually took on that effort of doing some of that coordination and that analysis and so on, they could provide to us, and that would really reduce our capacity requirements?
To the chair, I'd also suggest perhaps some of the colleagues as well who are working on the project in depth might want to provide comment. At this time, while there's recognition that both projects will have an impact over the course of the timeline, the project timeline, there hasn't been a lot of formal coordination in terms of documentation. And I think that that's likely a reflection of what the requirements are at other levels or regulatory bodies. So we haven't seen a lot of that coordination. In terms of impact for staff, it's hard to look at these projects independently when they're going to provide an impact overall to the community at the same time. Therefore, it takes longer, I would say, to provide substantive feedback in relation to each project independently. But I'll just look to my colleagues if they're able to also add something.
Through the chair. So I think I would just echo Kate's comments in that the only thing I would add is I think from a staff perspective, I think we have a good idea of the two different projects and what's happening. It's the impacts are probably the biggest issue that are being separated. So perhaps this is an issue for broader community to understand these as two separate projects and what's going on with each and track the progress. But I'm not sure if combining the two projects, would significantly lessen the impact it's having on our resources, if that was your question.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other staff want to comment on this particular piece? No? Okay. Councillor Stoner and then Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, just want to pick up on the traffic control management plan issue again. It is a requirement of Fortis's certificate that they do actually provide a traffic control management plan for a minimum of 40 days prior to planned commencement of construction. So just so that is flagged. But I am also curious, between the work permits that are required and the building permits, if there's anything in there that we could use as a trigger to get those traffic management plans. I think that's one of the things that I have heard will likely be the biggest impact on our community as they start to truck material through the tunneling. And so I'm just curious, how do we actually get that information, what leverage points we have through our permitting processes?
Sarah Bailey, Director of Engineering. I can answer that question through the chair. Yes, we have the ability through our work permit process to be reviewing that traffic management plan in more detail. Our current requirements are that we don't tend to issue that permit more than 45 days in advance of the work. So that review will be coming later for us. And a trigger for the work permit is if you're doing construction works within our right of way. So the work permit will be looking after the implications for construction through Finch and Industrial Avenue. And we'll be looking at that in detail. As part of the work permit, we can also request for information on their mitigation strategy for dust, erosion sediment control, noise, environmental requirements for the discharging of their dewatering, a number of items which will be covered under our work permit process, but that will be happening much later as they're getting closer to Finch and Industrial, because that's the area we can regulate within our right of way.
Was there anything within the building permits that might flag a requirement for traffic management?
Through the chair. So unfortunately, not as much as there is through the engineering permits, because for building permits, essentially what we are limited to at issuance is, are there emergency crews able to get, or the fire department able to get to the site in case of an emergency? Is there legal access to the site? And that's about it.
And what are the building permits that they require?
For WLNG?
For Fortis?
For Fortis, it's so the workforce accommodation site will quite likely require building permits. A lot of the buildings in the project, they're kind of on the edge of being permanent or temporary from a code perspective. So we're still going through that process of determining what's going to require a permanent and a permit or what's not. Large retaining walls would require building permits as well.
Thank you. My one other question is a comment in here that raised some flags for me around the FortisBC Worker Code of Conduct. It said FortisBC notified that revisions would not be considered. Just wondering if staff can speak to why they won't be. I mean, you can't actually answer why they wouldn't be, but were we asked to provide feedback on it and they just chose not to accept them, or are they just send it to us for information?
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, so yes, the statement in the report is correct. We did provide comment to them. They did ask for feedback if we had any feedback. Their comments at the time were that they were interested in receiving our feedback, but they would not be changing their Workers' Code of Conduct. We have had subsequent conversations with Fortis since that time and provided additional information and additional feedback on the Workers' Code of Conduct, but we are yet to see any revisions or changes or additional information back from Fortis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but I just want to make sure I understand things. So WLNG is proposing construction start date in August 2023. They're proposing that they house their construction workers on the flotel. All right. Have they submitted the TUP for the flotel or given a date by when they anticipate submitting a TUP for the flotel?
Through the chair, WLNG has not submitted an application for the TUP for the flotel. I can share that they have procured a vessel, but we haven't seen any applications yet. As far as their application for the site as a whole, they still need to go through the DPA1 environmental process before we can actually bring something to you for approval.
Thanks.
Any further questions for our staff at this time? I can see are you, okay, if we're working on a motion, I think one step I'd like to accomplish here that's not on our agenda is we should move receipt of the report. So can we do that now? It would be Councillor French and second by Councillor Hamilton. Thank you. Any comments on it, or we've done that in our comments? Okay, with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And then Councillor Penningham.
Yeah, thanks. Move that council consider the issue of timing of EAO conditions and project separation in relation to project approvals for upcoming UBCM and provincial engagement. And I'll speak to that if seconded. That council consider the issues of timing of EAO conditions and project separation in relation to project approvals for upcoming UBCM and provincial engagement.
I'll second it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and the way I worded it this way is for resolution, it would be the following year, but we may have opportunity to speak to ministers at this UBCM or other engagements. So I wanted to sort of flag that mostly with in mind a future UBCM resolution, but I didn't want to imply that we would not otherwise talk about this. So I'm trying to give some flexibility as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to speak this? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And thank you to staff for all their work, not just on this report, but by summing up all the work into this one report for us. It was very, very helpful. And I look forward to seeing these updates monthly. I think we'll see those now. So thank you. Next, we have a delegation. Was the delegation given a time? And are they joining us physically or electronically? They were told 2:30. Okay. Okay, then we shall recess until we have our delegation. Projected to be half an hour. Thank you. This meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023. We're on to item 6, delegations, and we have the folks from Woodfibre, Liquefied Natural Gas here with us today. So, and I will turn it over to you. You can join us at the table, and maybe you can introduce yourself and your team. One second, just sorry, that's okay. I'll let you get. It's okay. We can. So you need to use the mics when you speak. Just push the button and it'll go green, and then you're good. You'll need to turn it off after. And I believe our team is going to put your presentation on the screen for us, and then there you go. Okay, now over to you.
Okay, for sure. Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you everyone for having us. I'm Christine Kennedy. I'm the president of Woodfibre LNG. I'm pleased to have here with us today Selena Basi, our Vice President of Government and External Relations. And in the chairs at the back here, we have Julia Diamond, Senior Manager, Government and External Relations. Daria Hasselman, our Senior Manager, Community Relations. And Laura Prosco, who works in Community Relations here in Squamish. Thank you for having us. Are we ready to go? So we're happy to be here today to talk to you about our community services and infrastructure management program or plan, give you an update on the project, go over the process of engagement that we've been through so far and talk about what we've heard, talk about some of the highlights of our plan and mitigations, talk about reporting and monitoring and next steps, and then take your questions. What I would say is that Selena and I are just going to trade back and forth a little bit in the presentation process. So, we may interrupt each other midstream. So, that's kind of expected with us. We talk over each other all the time. Big things so far this year. You'll be aware that we announced our net zero roadmap in March. Significant product of our work last year was going over the process of developing how we could get there, what those steps would be, what portion could be done by incremental emissions abatement in the facility right away, and what portion in the interim would be done both through nature-based carbon offsets. Really, really very excited about how far that has come and our plans going forward on it. It's a major commitment of the company and we take it very seriously. Lots of work going on across the company on our various environmental management plans and community engagement related to that, both through broad open house venues and through more specific one-on-one engagements in some cases and round tables and similar. Construction is still intended to start in fall 2023. The construction contractor that will take on the majority of that work is currently in the process of being onboarded, and they'll be responsible for the majority of the trades hiring. Our flotel amendment is currently with the BC EAO for its approval. And as you will have heard here, we're definitely ramping up a whole lot of our community partnership programming, donations, sponsorships, and similar in the community. We were really pleased to be able to contribute over $150,000 earlier this year to I think it was 42 community nonprofits, and that was the first intake for this year. We're also in the process of initiating programs related to gender safety, and we will have cultural awareness training as well as gender safety training for all staff and contractors as the project moves forward. Selena, I'll hand this one over to you.
Great. So thank you, Christine, for providing a little bit of context. I think this is the first time that Christine and I are able to address your council as it is currently formed, and it's really good to see you all. The focus of today's presentation, of course, is our Community Services and Infrastructure Management Plan. This is one of the 4 socioeconomic plans that we have been working through the district's 7-step consultation process. And so as part of our work at the staff level, it was suggested and requested that we do come to make this presentation to council in advance of our submission of this plan to the BC Environmental Assessment Office. So as you can see on the slides, this is a regulatory requirement. It's a specific condition in our BC Environmental Assessment Certificate. The CSIMP, as it's called, it is to be developed in consultation with Indigenous groups and local and provincial governments. And so what you'll see here today is some of the results of the consultation that we have been involved in since September of earlier 2022. I'll also note that there was an earlier consultation round on the CSIMP in earlier iterations of the project, and so that feedback has been brought forward into this document as well. And I just also thought it would be good to set some context here today. We know that there are things that the community will continue to be interested in, many issues that will fall outside of the direct scope of the CSIMP. So today we will take you through some of the key themes of the CSIMP, but know that there's lots of avenues for continuing to have those conversations on those related issues that are directly out of scope, but we will try and keep the conversation focused for the purposes of today on this being a regulatory requirement and condition. As mentioned, we are developing targeted initiatives and programming to identify those concerns. The CSIMP is a annualized document, and we'll talk about how we're going to report on that and make sure we're living up to all of the identified concerns throughout the life of the project. One of the things that we will be talking about today is community safety, gender safety. Some of those initiatives have been developed in partnership with our Indigenous groups. I think folks in this room all know that Squamish Nation is both a regulator as well as a partner on this project. And we are also working very actively with the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation as well as other Indigenous groups that are impacted by the project. You'll see here the topic of a worker code of conduct, and we'll talk more about that throughout the presentation, but I know it's something that has come up in a lot of our community consults, so I thought we would address it here head on, just to note that we are developing a comprehensive worker code of conduct, and that is intended to apply to all workers and contractors, whether they are off or on duty within the community, and you'll see here they should not be in the community very much, and that would extend beyond Woodfibre to our EPC, as well as all of those others is the intention here. So I'll just talk a little bit again. I mentioned that we have been actively engaged with community on this plan. We've taken this really seriously, and we've done a lot of targeted as well as roundtable style engagement. So again, you'll see going back to July of last year, we did have our initial kickoff with the District of Squamish staff, and this involved not only identifying our engagement approach that we'd been taking, but also taking input and feedback on who should be on these stakeholder lists. Obviously, you'll know your community best, and so we really valued that opportunity for early engagement with district staff. We began to share the document with our Indigenous groups for initial review back in September, and then we held our first community roundtable. We had received some feedback that was too early and that we should develop out more of the plan. I'm actually really glad that we held that first roundtable in September. We certainly took an earful from a lot of our stakeholders around things that were important to the community, but again, I'm glad we took that approach because it allowed us to hear a really authentic, unfiltered version of feedback from people when there was still a lot of information that we wouldn't have known at that time. And so as Christine mentioned, with now our construction subcontractor being onboarded, with more certainty over the kind of level of contracts that we will have, it's easier to know more of those details. And so we'll be able to tell you more of those details at this stage in the project than we would have in September, but it really allowed us to understand the community concerns. We held an open house in October. I know that many of you did attend that open house. That was our first public open house as the project under this iteration, and it was a well-attended open house, and again, a lot of feedback was received and a lot of learnings for us from that open house as well as to how we need to engage within the community in a cultural and gender safety lens being applied to all of our engagements. As you can see here, we continued to refine the document, share that with key stakeholders and Indigenous groups. We've had targeted discussion with the District of Squamish staff throughout the various iterative versions of the CSIMP. And that culminated in sort of our last, I guess you could call, significant discussion with district staff at the end of April, where it was identified that we should come and present in this forum. And so again, I know how busy council schedules are, so thank you for fitting us in at this time. And again, we did have another community roundtable that was held at the end of April, and community did tell us that that those that attended that call, and I know many of you were on that call as well, that it looked like there had been responses to a lot of those key concerns that were identified. So we took that feedback and we'll continue to refine, and then we will be looking to submit that to the Environmental Assessment Office within a few weeks' time. So thanks for letting me go through that detail there. I think it's just important that folks know that this has gone through a lot of iterations.
So, like as Selena said, over the course of all of that engagement, like there's been a series of issues identified in the community, and things that we've taken very seriously as we, like move to plan the project, and things that we have put like significant focus into mitigating. That will be reflected in the plan, and we're pleased to talk about some of those today. We have certainly heard about the like impact on jobs and both an interest in project related employment, but also, like concerns from local businesses about limited availability in the labor market and pressure on like other business categories. We are going to take a very balanced approach to like prioritizing our training, economic development, and procurement opportunities to include local businesses, and to work on a logical, sensible program of like training for local residents, but keeping that in balance and always recognizing the need to monitor employment data, the need to talk to the business community, and to stay like linked in with that. We want to be able to ensure that we like maximize local benefits, including employment, while making sure that we're like mitigating impacts, including on other businesses. So that's been something that we've taken very seriously all the way through. And that we will continue to talk to the business community about as we move forward. In our early conversations with you, of course, we had plenty of discussion around housing, around like the need to minimize impacts on like the rental market, particularly on housing availability and on housing affordability. Every time I come into Squamish, it's great to see the amount of like residential development that's going up, but I know it takes a long time to get from building new developments to actually having those available, and only some of them will be rental buildings. This is something that we have taken like very seriously through the process of the flotel, and through internal company like planning and actions all the way through the project. Recently, the company implemented an internal policy that requires employees to stay in company designated housing. So you're aware that we have the lease on the Sirocco building, and the like, I think it's 95 bedrooms there. And we also have like the flotel. So in combination between those and locally engaged workforce from Squamish and the Sea to Sky region, we think that we will like fully mitigate concerns with impact on housing. Selena, do you want to address the discussions around policing because you've been more directly involved?
Sure. So we know that in discussions with the district staff for a number of months, concerns around impacts on community in terms of strain on policing has been continuously raised. And so I'm pleased that we have implemented a monthly call with the RCMP. We are very engaged with the local RCMP. And right now, the approach that we are taking is to absolutely, of course, first off, take a preventative approach to making sure that incidents that do occur on site are minimized, and so that we would not require RCMP presence there. And that's been consistent with our conversations with the RCMP. In terms of prior concerns related to impacts of the Woodfibre project on police resources in community, you'll see here that with the workforce required to use the flotel, the intention is that that is severely avoided and minimized. And we're continuing to have those conversations. So just wanted to address that here. Our orientation, of course, will also be including training on cultural awareness and preventing gender-based violence. So again, a real culture of prevention. And our site security will also be culturally aware and trained in all of the different types of approaches and mitigations to ensure that the diverse workforce that we intend to have on the flotel feels comfortable using the policing and security resources that are available to them. We've also been engaged with the RCMP with regards to their intimate partner violence officer, as well as looking to get linked into their Indigenous integrated unit to make sure that's all wrapped around. And I know that this is an area that the district is of particular interest in, so we can continue to have that conversation. Certainly we are having that conversation at the staff level, but wanted to flag that that monthly meeting with the RCMP is also in place.
So in the process of the engagement, of course, we're aware of, and we've taken very seriously, like concerns about a temporary workforce and the risk of gender-based violence or sexual assault. We are well aware of the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls inquiry, its recommendations for industry, and of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women's report to the Federal House of Commons in December of last year. We take all of that seriously, and we recognize that all major events or gatherings of people present some level of risk, whether it's a convention or whether it's industrial workforce. An industrial workforce is just in place longer than some of those other more transitional things. So I would never want to suggest that industrial workforce employees are more prone to that type of activity than anyone else. It's just there for a longer period of time. So we've taken really serious all of the comments, advice, input that we've had on this, and they've gone into shaping how we are planning to go forward on the project and some of the other programming that we're building around that. The workforce that is on the flotel is expected to have very little access to the community and certainly no recreational access. Of course, people from the flotel may come for supply purposes, and at any point, if there were ever a medical emergency that required more care than will be available on the flotel, naturally that the workforce would come for those reasons. But other than that, during their term on the flotel, we expect that workers will be there for their shift rotation and will not be regularly in contact with the community. I think that we've spoken previously to you about all of the rooms on the flotel being individual bedrooms with their own private bathroom, which is significant in avoiding that kind of risk. We will always, as Selena has mentioned, ensure that all of the personnel on this vessel, supervisory, first aid, medical, security, trained in the appropriate responses for harassment and any type of gender-based violence. All workers, Selena mentioned this, I think, in the previous slide, but we do want to reinforce it, will have provided to them safe methods for reporting any incidents of harassment, any type of violence or assault in ways that are independent, where they can truly be heard and where that will be responded to. And the code of conduct, as mentioned earlier, will apply to everyone that works on the project, whether they're on or off shift, and we'll take that very seriously. You can go on from here.
Sure, and you'll note that we do talk a lot about this topic throughout the presentation, and that's just reflective of how much we did hear on the topics of community safety, gender-based violence, and making sure that both the community and the flotel are safe in terms of workspaces and community and healthy living spaces. So if you do hear that a lot, just know that that's reflective of the level of commentary that we did receive at our various roundtable. And I know that the last topic is certainly something that we hear a lot, certainly in community, and that's our combined impact with the Fortis EGP. Eagle Mountain Pipeline. So some of the things that we have done to be responsive to those comments is that we have in our CSIMP document identified where there could be those compounding effects, and those don't necessarily need to be taken in a compounding way when it's reviewed by the Environmental Assessment Office, but we've tried to make it easy and visible, and that was at the direct request actually of the former mayor. So we did incorporate that feedback into our drafts. We do always need to stress that Woodfibre LNG and Eagle Mountain Pipeline are regulated separately. They received separate BC environmental assessment certificates, requirements, and construction schedules. But we've taken, again, that feedback really seriously, and we have tried to align. We continue to align, and we will continue to collaborate to minimize those impacts. And I know that's particularly important to folks in this room, and we know that we'll continue to receive feedback on that. But we've also consulted with the Environmental Assessment Office ourselves on this and sought some guidance to make sure that we are really making sure we're walking that fine line of two separately regulated projects, while also looking to collaborate to minimize impacts on capacity and resources here at the district, as well as make it clear for the community. And so we'll continue to do that through the construction stage of the project as well. Okay, so when we get into the CSIMP itself, it is organized by themes, and these are the themes that correlate to the items in the topic. So community, services, infrastructure. We'll talk a little bit more throughout the presentation about the other socioeconomic management plans that will be being developed over the course of the next number of weeks and consulted on, but this is the focus of the CSIMP, so these are the themes that we will discuss. So again, a key theme here being, sorry, there's a typo on this slide. It should say quality of life and sustainable development. So in terms of quality of life and sustainable development, we definitely want to ensure that the project is not impacting anyone's quality of life. In fact, our focus is to maximize benefits for your community while minimizing and avoiding those impacts wherever that is possible. So we've talked a little bit about positive opportunities for local businesses and workers. Obviously, with the flotel being quite self-contained, that does minimize any, sort of major economic impacts on things like recreation or hospitality, but we're really looking forward to looking at ways that we can make sure that those impacts are mitigated while some of those benefits are realized. And so some discussions with, for instance, the Business Improvement Association and the Chamber are in early stages with regards to that supply chain and maximizing that local content for the flotel. And I think folks do know that we have some strong business relationships with Squamish Nation as well, and a number of Squamish Nation businesses that will be playing into that whole landscape. But again, really want to make this a positive impact on local businesses where it is possible. We know, again, the workforce is not going to be impacted in any major way. We know that there's a lot of people that are really committed to the positions they're in, and we've talked a lot with your Economic Development Department about how we can ensure that that remains intact and that there's no sort of, tit for tat on employees that are really needed to support the local economy. And again, so the mitigation there is really this ongoing collaboration with local economic and business groups. We've talked a little bit and we'll continue to talk a lot about our hiring focus. So really wanting to promote job opportunities for Indigenous peoples, certainly locals that are interested, and other represented groups such as women, students, and people of color. And so again, you know your community best. And so if there are people that are interested in the project, please do direct them our way. In terms of this, the flotel is again a key mitigation. The flotel is intended to be a diverse and welcoming work environment. I think a lot of folks know that typically an industrial environment has a hyper-masculine feel to it. And so through the programming that we are developing, our hope is that it is inclusive and welcoming because everybody should have that opportunity to have that, economic benefit of working in that field, should that be of interest to them. We're interested in looking at possible co-benefits if there is any areas that local organizations are looking to develop training programs or talent attraction, if there is community level interest. And if not, we can look at other approaches to develop out that workforce talent that doesn't have an impact on the community. We are going to be having our project-specific website regularly updated, and that will have all of the information about construction workforce requirements, job descriptions, application procedures, and all of that local hiring information that can maximize those economic benefits, again, if they are of interest, and if not, then again, our secondary approach is to look at the region as a whole and looking at that non-local workforce as well as a workforce along sort of the corridor that may not need to impact any housing in the community. So that would be what we would consider a local workforce as long as they're regional.
So on housing and accommodation, like I know that it probably gets a little bit repetitive as we go through this, but we have organized it by category of impact. And so we just want to really reinforce as we go along, like how we're going to manage on the project, like housing needs for at peak periods only. And there's a typo on this one as well, like of like non-local temporary workers up to 800. I mean, that is like the workforce up to 800 during peak construction, and how we're going to manage like the housing impacts around that. And our mitigations on that are, as like have been mentioned so far, the flotel located on site, self-contained, really very like premier accommodations with all of the like services and capacity and recreational dining, all of that provided on board, and able to procure from the community, but not really interface with the community that much, as well as like the Sirocco facility that we've leased in the community and the like housing accommodation availability there. As I said earlier, locally engaged folks obviously already live in the community and will have no impact on housing, as do others. Like, you know, I mean, from the Sea to Sky corridor, we don't consider them necessarily like impacting community housing. We did, however, like as I referenced earlier in the discussion, recently establish like corporate policy that required our workforce like to, if they're staying in the community, they are in company designated housing, which means like Sirocco. And we've hired a housing coordinator position to manage that process. And over time, we're anticipating that that housing coordinator would also manage like the much more gradual process of identifying housing for the permanent workforce once they come on for the project.
Okay, so another theme area is with regards to municipal utilities. And again, the concern or the non-mitigated impact of this would be that new residents in our operations stage and as well as during construction could produce obviously types of waste, which would create pressure for local utility and waste management services. We have learned that many of your municipal facilities are at capacity. And so the focus here is to look at where we can be self-contained wherever possible to not add to that capacity. And so we understand that when there is no capacity available, we need to look at alternative solutions. And so that's been a really clear conversation over the past number of months as well. So some of the mitigations that we have looked at here that are a part of the CSIMP is to certainly procure waste management services for the flotel. Our understanding is that the landfill is at capacity and is not an option. So just rest assured there. Working with local utility suppliers to look at our own utilities as well. Potable water to be self-sufficient at site. If you do come to our site, and I know we have invited folks out for site tours, don't drink the water. So we are looking at improvements to that at this time. Looking at potentially installing separate network and cellular infrastructure on the flotel. We know for people working in a camp environment, access to good Wi-Fi is of the utmost importance. Stay connected to family and friends. So that's something that we are looking at ensuring is in place. as well as private disposal of solid waste and recycling services as well. So again, we heard clearly at our first roundtable, and again, through ongoing conversations with the district. So just wanted to make this information available to you today as well. We will be developing waste management plans that will have all of our strategies. We are obviously incorporating district's zero waste philosophies into all of those wherever it is possible, looking to divert waste from landfills, and overall looking for opportunities to recycle or reuse and compost organic waste where that is possible. And we'll be setting up guidelines and training for all of our staff once they are in place on site to minimize that waste. Again, being the first net zero facility in the world, it's our focus to make sure that all of our policies and practices align with a green and sustainable approach. So overall, what this slide is saying is that we do not intend to have any impacts on your municipal utilities, and we'll be looking at alternatives wherever that is possible. And again, trying to keep things as self-contained as is possible on site.
So in continuing in the theme of not intending to impact community infrastructure or services, on education and recreational services, like we've mentioned that like the concern was, of course, that the workforce could increase demand for that programming and like significantly overwhelm in the construction stage community recreational facilities and resources. Our mitigation through the flotel is to ensure that there's no impacts during the construction phase. And of course, we'll like collaborate during the operational phase. We've spoke to it earlier, but like the flotel will have on board significant recreational and leisure capacity for the workforce so that there won't be any need to access like programming and services within the community, health, recreation, like seminars, training opportunities, like there's a significant program being developed there for the flotel, for the workforce aboard the flotel. It will really be a particularly excellent vessel. I'd mentioned earlier that there will be no recreational access to the community for the workforce that is like staying on the flotel. We heard you, we took you very seriously. And we've implemented programs to address that. We will support contributions for local charities, not-for-profits through our community partnership program. We're super excited about how that has expanded this year in its first intake, and we'll continue to build that up again later over the year. Another intake on that. You've heard about it before, so I really won't belabor it here, but yeah, it was a great opportunity to support such a wide variety of community groups and support the programming that they deliver. We've so far contributed approximately $1 million through this program, and it's scaling up significantly this year. So very, very pleased with that opportunity to give back.
Sure, and I'll just add a couple more things on this one. I think some of you may not know that I am kind of the lead for community programming for Woodfibre along with Daria and Laura. And I would say that in addition to the community partnership program, we're at the stage of really getting to know your community, getting to know obviously things like biking are important. And so over time, community collaboration for operations phase, I think that means that we're very interested in looking at net benefits and aligning with the recreational and education priorities of the community. But in the interim, our focus is really on making sure there is no impact or pressure on those items. I'll also say that when we had our first roundtable in September, a lot of people were really concerned about quality of life for the workforce on the flotel. So I think our next slide might talk about that a little bit. But here, just to reiterate that the quality of life for people on the flotel, it should be pretty good. Private bedrooms, onboard dining services, 24-hour security, access to support services for if there's counseling required or emotional supports, recreation, leisure, all of that. Yeah, it does go into the next slide, which is specifically on health and well-being. So again, there was some concern raised early on that the temporary workforce might place pressure on healthcare, medical services, and community well-being. And so again, we have put plans in place to make all of that available on the flotel. And that includes medical services, emergency services to a degree. Obviously, our focus is on safety, and that's safety from a physical as well as a cultural and emotional standpoint. So our culture of prevention, we're very hopeful will reduce those safety incidents and minimize any instances. But for anything sort of, above that threshold that would require access to emergency services, we expect that would be very minimal, and most of that will be, again, self-contained within the flotel. And Christine, I don't know if you want to speak to any of the specific mitigations. I know you've done a lot of work on the flotel.
I think that we've been over a fair amount of it here so far. But like, as Selena said, like, we're going to have, like, I'm a highly trained medical personnel on board, first aid. We're going to make sure that like, I've seen some of the, materials around the flotel, and it really is an exceptional vessel. Really nice, like, dining areas, recreational areas, all matter of, like, training rooms and stuff of that nature, like laundry facilities. Like, this will be in large part like a high-end hotel, but at the project site. So it really is going to be an exceptional facility. There's going to be a focus on healthy living on board, and the vendor will develop a process of, as I mentioned earlier, seminars, training opportunities, everything from opportunities for the workforce to learn more about financial management, on through to anything that may be needed for those that might struggle with addictions. This is a dry camp intended at this point. Certainly our intent is to have that be so, and that so that means it's free of alcohol, and that there will be all of the policies around drug and alcohol on it. But we know that addictions exist in the population, and so the personnel on board will be trained and equipped to deal with that, and to respond accordingly, should that arise in the population. It really, it's going to be quite an exceptional facility, and gym, recreational training programs. I can't, say specifically whether that's CrossFit or yoga right now until they've given us the whole list, but real opportunities for the workforce outside their shift day. So we thoroughly intend that this be a place that prioritizes the health and well-being of the workforce, as well as mitigating any impacts on the community. So you can go to the next slide.
Okay, and this is just again on the safety and security. So we had heard concerns would be that a non-mitigated effect would be that incidents on site could impact resident health, wealth, and safety. And so the mitigation here again is to severely limit that community interaction for flotel-based residents, making that facility a great place where they want to stay, and then promoting our culture of safety and prevention and ensuring those services are at site. So I think we've canvassed a lot of this previously, and this is just sort of the way the presentation is set up. So apologies if it is repetitive, but we'll continue our discussions with the key stakeholders, including the local RCMP and the district, including that monthly meeting. We'll maintain that 24-hour site security team, including we're looking for specialized staff that are trained in gender and cultural violence, including looking for instance, dedicated female staff in the security team. We will be strictly enforcing that project worker code of conduct. The violations of that code will have consequences, which would include potentially being banned permanently from site. So we do take that really seriously. We'll be implementing our community feedback and inquiry process, and that's for complaints and grievances related to the project. And you get that's manned by, it's going to be attended by an actual person at a senior level. So I think that's really positive, and our intention is to be really responsive to those concerns and get those feedback tools in place. And then again, continuing to focus on mitigations and ensuring our appropriate response mitigations are in place throughout the project. A lot of our management plans are designed to be adaptive. Certainly, I think CSIMP as a flotel is in place, and we see where we need more improvement, then we can use this as the basis to continue to refine and improve things, as well as, taking more of that advice from the community and key stakeholder groups as we go. So this slide here just talks about areas that we haven't canvassed today. So things related to land, marine, and emergency. Those are in the other management plans that are going currently through the district's 7-step engagement process. So we just thought we would flag here that they are forthcoming. The Marine Transportation Monitoring and Management Plan, we held a preliminary roundtable in October, and we're planning a second one in June. The emergency response plan is, I believe, currently with district staff for review. We did have a roundtable in February and a further engagement just a couple of weeks ago in May. And our traffic management plan, again, now that we have a construction subcontractor being onboarded, we can finalize those details. And again, the same principles will apply to all of these plans to mitigate any impacts wherever that is possible, and employ a collaborative approach with any of the services that you already have in place, and augmenting and collaborating where that is possible as well. In terms of monitoring and reporting, we will be working with our EPC, so our engineering, procurement, construction contractor, which I think most folks know is McDermott International. We'll be working on a reporting framework so that we're collecting all of these socioeconomic metrics from the contractors and subcontractors on a monthly basis. I know we've made commitments to the district that we will continue to kind of own all of that information and collate it and make sure there's a really clear line of sight as to everything that is going on as the project owner, and be the reporting facet to you. We'll be using these metrics to monitor the socioeconomic effects of the project. Again, I talked about adaptive management. That is adaptive management in a continuous improvement methodology. So just because something is in the CSIMP today does not mean there's not room for continuous improvement. It's not a fallback, it's a baseline, it's a starting point, and it can be refined as we see further mitigations may be required. And then again, as a regulatory requirement, we will prepare and issue to the Environmental Assessment Office an annual report on our CSIMP, which will start 1 year after construction, and we'll be presenting that to Indigenous groups and stakeholders, as well as reporting that through our website mechanisms. And anything you want to mention here? So our next step, again, there is the current draft with District of Squamish staff presenting to council this afternoon, and then we will be looking to collate any final feedback and submitting that to the Environmental Assessment Office in June. That CSIMP would then be publicly posted prior to the start of construction, and that annualized reporting would begin 1 year after the start of construction.
And of course, we would happily take feedback in the, between the start of construction and the annual report. So as we've demonstrated here, as we have in our engagements with the public, with District of Squamish staff, with Squamish Nation and others, we're really committed to this process of maximizing the local benefits and minimizing impacts on your community. We've taken it seriously from the beginning. Certainly from when Selena and I and some of the others here today joined the company. And I think that we are preparing pretty comprehensive responses to the issues that were raised and finding ways to mitigate those concerns. We welcome ongoing feedback now, throughout the course of the project, and as issues arise, as they may on a large construction project, we will address them and mitigate them at the time. We understand that not everything can be codified in a CSIMP document before construction starts, and you have to be like, you know, I'm willing to listen, adapt, and respond as it goes forward. So the process that we've been through, like from the initial feedback on this through to the mitigations that we've like presented today, certainly all intended to be responsive to the community feedback and specific areas of concern, and to focus on the core ones that have been presented to us in the course of developing this plan and addressing and mitigating concerns that were raised from the community. We know, as Selena mentioned, that there are other plans that are developed separately from this one that address things that are also important to the community that are currently going through the 7-step process, such as traffic and those other plans. So those don't fit entirely within the like scope of a CSIMP because they have their own plan. But those are also like in the works at the same time. So any other, you know, I mean, we thank you, of course, for your time today. Thank you for letting us present. Thank you to everybody that engaged over the course of developing this, because you really did provide meaningful and important feedback. Like we appreciate your, you know, like comments and your involvement in this as we take it forward. And we're happy to take your comments.
Thank you for the presentation. I have Councillor Stoner to start us off.
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you for being here and for the presentation and the update. A few questions. I'm wondering if I can get clarification on your proposed current construction timeline. I heard, I think in this presentation, fall of 2023, our staff earlier today suggested August is your proposed start date. So I'm just wondering if you can clarify when you're expecting construction to begin.
Construction is still intended to start in September. There are some pre-mobilization things that may occur before September. And so I know that that engagement is happening with staff, but like pre-mobilization would not like mean that construction started any earlier. So it's still very much our intent to start in September.
Okay, wonderful. That's helpful. Thank you. And then really appreciate the overview of the timeline and the engagement specifically on the CSIMP. I'm just curious where you see public consultation fitting in. So I heard that you're looking to submit by the end of this month or early June. And as per your EA certificate requirements, you have to conduct public consultation as per requirement number 24. So where does public consultation of this document fit in?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So a couple of different forums of public consultation. As mentioned, those roundtables were quite comprehensive and the public was welcome to attend those, as well as the targeted stakeholders that were received invitations. And then, as you know, we did have a significant, very broad open house in October. And so all of the questions and core themes that we heard related to CSIMP were collated, and that's where you hear the one-to-one responses. So 3 distinct opportunities for public engagement, as well as one-to-one follow-ons, which would be provided in that record of consultation, which goes to the Environmental Assessment Office.
Okay, so I was present at the October 12th event, but there wasn't actually any specific details around the CSIMP. There were some broad themes, but I'm just curious if the public has had an opportunity to comment on the document itself.
So our understanding is that the public doesn't require to comment on the document itself, and all of the key themes that were at the October 12th were also thoroughly canvassed on September 7th and April 27th. And so our record of consultation will show that, and actually it will contain in and of itself in the CSIMP a record that shows what we heard at all of those events. The themes, as you can see from this presentation, are really kind of the same. So it's the housing, the impacts on community, the impacts on workforce. And so we have thoroughly canvassed those through public consultation, which will be contained in the record of consultation and the what we heard documentation in the CSIMP.
Okay, thank you for that. My next question is around the housing, and as per your presentation, it appears there's a lot weighing on the flotel, which is still under EA amendment and being reviewed. So I'm curious if you put any thought into what Plan B is if the flotel is not approved.
There's always been like lots of consideration for how housing was going to be approached in the community. Certainly, we respect the like processes and timelines of EAO and like the various socioeconomic and technical considerations that they will, you know, like put to that process. As the flotel is like one of the core mitigations for housing impacts on the community, we are not concerned about whether or not like it will be accepted as an amendment. It's a matter of like what technical requirements they have for that and whether or not there are conditions on it. But like certainly we have always considered, and I know that, you know, I mean, it was considered before the flotel concept was ever developed, that there are alternative housing offered like methodologies. The flotel was explicitly developed as a mitigation for pressures on community housing. So we're confident that regulators are very well aware of that, and we engage with them regularly. We understand that they've got a process to work through. And so at this point, we are not currently considering alternate housing options.
Okay, and then just back to timeline, with an expected September construction start date, the EAO has not yet approved the flotel, and I don't think the district has received a temporary use permit application for the flotel. When do you expect workers to be in the community, and when do you expect the flotel to be operational?
The flotel is expected to arrive in January 2024. There is a very like slow and gradual workforce like curve prior to the flotel, and there will be other accommodations made outside the community for that workforce in advance of the flotel arriving. So that will take place outside the community boundaries.
Thank you. And then just one final question for now. You've set pretty, I'd say you've been very responsive to the feedback that you've heard, I think, from the community and gone so far as to create things like the flotel. From what I hear, this level of standard is going to be applied across both Woodfibre employees as well as subcontractors. I appreciate that FortisBC is a separate project under a different EA. But technically, FortisBC and the Eagle Mountain Pipeline is a subcontractor to Fortis. It wouldn't exist without it. And so I'm just curious if these same standards will apply to Fortis from your perspective as a subcontractor to Woodfibre.
Fortis is not a subcontractor to Woodfibre. I would say, first of all, you know, I mean, we do have a clear business relationship with them. I can't speak for Fortis, and of course, Fortis can't speak for Woodfibre. We're separate corporate entities. It'd be entirely inappropriate for us to speak on each other's behalf. But as we've done previously, I'm sure that like Fortis and Woodfibre would be happy to come and present jointly at some point so that we could do that in fairness. I certainly do know that, you know, in our engagement with the district and in our engagements with Fortis, there's a whole lot of collaboration, has been, continues to be, and there's lots of information on that reported up in regular meetings with like district staff and Fortis and ourselves. So certainly glad to come back with Fortis and have other conversations about that, but I can never represent on their behalf.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Pettingill, then Councillor Greenlaw.
Yeah, thanks. A couple things that were said there surprised me a bit. Your certificate condition 24 of your EA condition says consultation and engagement must include information sharing and discussion of site-specific mitigation measures, including the development and implementation of plans and the conditions of the certificate. So it's not about broad themes with the public, it's about the actual plans. And it was news to me that the public has been invited to these round tables. I've always been told that these were closed and invite only. So I'm wondering if you can clarify again, well, firstly, when you advertised to the public and provided invites to these round tables to the public. And I think, sort of repeating my colleague's question, when will the public see the actual plans for consultation before they're submitted to the EAO with the the other plans they depend on, because you can't understand if the housing is sufficient without understanding if the traffic, because the traffic is aligned to the housing, is aligned to the emergency response. They're all tied together. You can't look at them independently. So when does the public get to review and comment and engage on these things? And how will they be notified of these opportunities?
Sure. So if that was a misinterpretation, I apologize. So working with district staff, a representative list of the public was invited to those CSIMP roundtables. And if there were others that were wanting to be engaged, we rely on our folks in community as well as district staff through the 7-step process to identify those key representative members. So we do feel that group was very broad and representative. So your point is taken there. In terms of the EAO's review and approval, if they deem that insufficient, obviously that's something that we would need to come back and do more work on. But again, given the, I don't want to use the word repetition, but the prominence of the themes, we have really taken those away, taken them seriously, and provided that information. And it is, again, for EAO's approval in terms of the record of consultation and the work that has been done. And I know I can speak for the team behind me that we have really taken that quite seriously. We've consulted one-to-one. We've had the roundtables. We're here today. We're happy to take feedback that follows on today. And the document would be made public near the start of construction. And again, it is very comprehensive. So we do feel we've fulfilled EAO's duty as per our certificate. And that's for EAO to decide, I suppose, in a number of weeks' time. So really appreciate your comment.
Okay, thanks. And just to be clear, the public engagement has not been sufficient. In fact, I would say it's been grossly insufficient, and the public has a massive interest in this project, and it has not been met. And they want to see this plan, and they want a chance to provide feedback on it and the related plans. Another piece of feedback, Sirocco is part of the housing problem. It's not part of the solution. As far as I understand, that project was not planned with the intent of it being worker housing. It was planned with the intent of providing community housing. And the fact that it's management rather than tradespeople, or the fact that you had a lease, doesn't negate the fact that you're taking community housing out of the community at a time when there's an intense housing need. And so I would suggest that you need to find a way to actually put Sirocco back into the community instead of evicting the people who are living there now, and find an alternative. Why is management unable to live on the flotel? You say how wonderful it's going to be. Why can't management be there as well? I
We
guess
take and appreciate your comment, Councillor. What I would remind Council of is that Sirocco 1 was built because Woodfibre took out a lease on it. It was understood that Woodfibre would occupy that facility for a period of time for management and contractor management personnel. That was the basis on which Woodfibre entered into a lease, and that's been known for many years. So,
yeah, I don't think that was the community planning purpose for this building. And I think looking at the demand for housing and the rate at which housing is going up, we didn't need Woodfibre to have that go up. But leave that aside. I was just surprised about some of the comments around work camps. My understanding is that statistics are very clear around violence and substance abuse and so on that happens with work camps, and that it's not just because it's a longer duration. Like if you go, Microsoft and other tech companies have work camps. I'm not aware of these sorts of statistics there. There does seem to be something very unique and special to these sorts of work camps. And so I just want to understand how you are taking these concerns seriously when you're saying, oh, it's just like everything else, but longer.
I think that we've demonstrated really clearly that we've taken it super seriously, that we've got a dry camp that will be absolutely very closely managed for these issues, that the vectors that lead to that kind of violence are managed through having separate bathrooms, separate washroom facilities, and comprehensive programs and services related to this. So we thank you for your comment, but we have put a lot of time and attention into addressing those things and addressing them in ways that have been deeply collaborative with Indigenous women and with local stakeholders as well. So I think that substantive work has been done there, and then that we've answered your questions earlier in the presentation, but I thank you.
Okay, and Chair, one more item, if I can.
I'll go one more.
Okay, so just the around mitigations and competition for jobs. We know we desperately need housing, so we need the contractors and tradespeople to build the housing and to build the all the related stuff. And from mitigation so far, all I've heard you say is you'll monitor and you'll talk to people. But from what I understand, people have already said this is a problem. This is going to be a problem. And there hasn't been a mitigation. I haven't heard any actual mitigation expressed. So what is the mitigation you're planning for the fact that we can't have local tradespeople going to a project that, quite frankly, doesn't align with our community priorities at the moment? We need housing. We need tradespeople doing that sort of work. So how are you avoiding that? What's the mitigation? Not the observation, but the mitigation.
Yeah, and I think the mitigation there is that we do have a construction subcontractor that is aware of our CSIMP priorities, our plans. I think that most in this room would agree that we do live in a free market world where people are free to apply for a job if they feel it's going to provide a better life for their family or improve their standard of living. So as a corporation, I don't think there's anything we could do to exclude or prevent people from applying for Woodfibre related jobs if they are so qualified. But our commitment and our mitigation is to continue to work with your economic development department, the trades organizations, and other groups to monitor those impacts. And if there are further mitigations in the adaptive management approach I've discussed here today, let's look at them. We know that a lot of this workforce tends to be non-local. That's the reason for the flotel. And it may not make sense for someone who has a steady local trades job to take a 2 to 3 year stint. But I don't think that there's anything folks could do on our project to actually sort of exclude or discriminate against a local workforce should they choose to pursue that. So our commitment is really around monitoring that and seeing where we may need to implement any other supports or training or things like that to help with those impacts, because I hear you completely and your comment is appreciated. But again, only so much that a corporation can do.
Thank you. Councillor Greenlaw, and then Hamilton.
Thanks. The chair, I have some concerns about how you're going to ensure accountability throughout the ranks of your subcontractors and subcontractors of subcontractors. I appreciate that you have a lot of language around listening to our concerns as a community, the safety of the people in our community. But I just wonder, how will you ensure that the policies that you are bringing forward are being enforced by your contractors and by their subcontractors and by their subcontractors, et cetera?
There'll be a process in place to monitor that on an ongoing basis. Like Woodfibre will have in place specific monitorings and regular internal reporting. We will have our management will work on an ongoing basis with the management of contractor and subcontractor organizations. There will be joint training. And we do have, as I mentioned earlier, a Project Universal reporting system for incidents of concern that will transcend whatever organization they work in and come directly to the company.
Okay, so to be clear, Woodfibre will be taking responsibility for their subcontractors' employees and their behavior?
We have always taken responsibility for subcontractors, employees, and their behavior.
Yeah, okay, one second. I was hoping you could also speak to potentially the impacts of increased marine traffic during the construction period. Have you done much modeling of what that will look like and what the noise pollution would look like, so on and so forth?
Extensive, and Selena, I'll let you speak to this a little bit. That's outside of the scope of the CSIMP though, so would come in a separate plan.
Sure. So as mentioned, there is a focused management plan on the topic of marine transportation. We have held one roundtable on that to date, and that was in October. Again, we pulled some of those broad themes that we heard from community, and our second roundtable on that is scheduled to occur in June. So we would bring forward more of that detailed modeling, again, now that we have a construction subcontractor in place and more certainty over any of those traffic flows in the marine environment. We'll make sure that you do receive, Councillor Greenlaw, an invitation to that next roundtable for that very focused discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Hamilton.
Hi, thanks very much for the presentation and the very clear summary of your CSIMP. Local, when I think about obviously the project is contentious in our community. There's benefits and there's deficits. I believe one of the big benefits to our community is the local employment. Can you? I recognize that you need an extensive temporary workforce to be brought in, but you also say there are some locals. Can you estimate how many local trades jobs you'll be having throughout the construction phase? I recognize that may be hard to estimate, but I don't think I've ever seen estimates on that.
We're in the early process of doing that, but what I would say is it's not only like local trades jobs. There's an opportunity in this to be trained for security jobs, to be, like trained for like flotel management jobs, basically like the same as like, hospitality jobs, like hotel management type things. So the ability to specifically estimate the number of local trades still in the works as we bring on like the subcontractor, but definitely a variety of jobs available on the project, both on like the management and operation side, as well as in the like specific construction trades categories.
Okay, and in your slides, you use the word sustainable development. Sustainable has lots of different definitions to lots of different people. What do you mean by sustainable development in that context?
I think that was on the slide that talked about quality of life and sustainable. Yeah, so I think they're, again, really just making sure we are reading up on all of the community plans, your OCPs, your strategic priorities, and making sure that where there is that opportunity for alignment, we're doing that. Certainly, I know industrial projects of the past have that glorious boom bust cycle where it comes in, it changes the community for a few years, and then there's, the history of ghost towns. Absolutely not our intention. And in fact, I'll say it because she won't. Christine has worked really hard to make sure that we're mitigating any impact to have that, so that there is no impact on the community or very, very limited impact through the construction stage, and that whatever the impact is in the operations stage, we have runway to plan for that. We have runway to align with all of the priorities of the community, of the nation, and make that something that makes sense within the rest of your planning documents, so that 4 years from now, we're not, sitting here having the same conversation around, misalignment with things that are a priority to certainly this council and the community. So that's what's intended there. And then, of course, to us, sustainable always does have alignment with net zero and again, net zero reuse, recycle, reuse philosophies that we are also instilling throughout sort of the supply chain and our contractors as well. So kind of a twofold comment there.
Yeah, thanks. And it's that first use of the word sustainable that I'm a little bit uncertain about in this context, because we have a significant increase in workforce for a short duration. Yeah, and that is the definition, that is the creation, that is the cause of this boom bust cycle. So, and in order to educate myself on this, I went and looked up, and somebody from UC Davis, Megan Classic, wrote a great paper in 2022 reviewing almost 200 papers on boom bust cycles in the oil and gas industry and their impact on small communities. And her conclusion was boom bust communities often end up poorer and with slower economic growth than comparable communities that did not experience a boom. Everything I've heard about the economic impact so far has been on this: how many people do we have during the ramp up phase? How much workforce do we have during the construction? What happens to all of those local workers when construction is finished? Do you have any mitigation plans to deal with the significant number of your construction workforce that are going to be living in our community unemployed when construction is finished?
What we would say there, and I would tie this back to Councillor Pettingill's comment earlier, that you have a very robust trades employment market here in Squamish right now. So we certainly don't think that we would affect the continued development of your community. The project results in at least 100 well-paying long-term jobs in operations. Construction workforces, which is why you need to have a flotel to house non-local people, tend to migrate from project to project. Absolutely they do, whether that's us, other projects elsewhere in BC, projects in Alberta. That's why we have a flotel. Those that are developed within the community to work on this project, such as roles that I mentioned earlier. It's not like a project like this ends its need for transportation or security or other personnel at the time that the construction part of the job is done. So construction workforces are always transitional. This job comes with a significant workforce and an intent to be part of this community for 40 years thereafter. So certainly long-term intent to ensure that that footprint is managed well and that there are opportunities for people into the operation stage cycle as well.
Sorry, did you just say you'll be transferring people from the construction phase into jobs during the operation?
For opportunities to develop roles for people in operations. That does not suggest specifically that one construction trade is able to immediately transition to an operating trade, because those are different certifications.
Thank you. Council, you may have noticed that we've pushed through. The presentation took up a little bit more of the time than anticipated. So we've pushed through and into the feedback time we had for staff. We're going to keep going on our questions here. We're going to have a hard stop at 4, and we'll compile the feedback and provide it separately, just so everyone's aware of the agenda and so on. Now I'll go to Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. And my question is a follow-up off of Councillor Hamilton's last line of questioning. In the presentation, I heard wording to the effect of the housing coordinator could arrange housing for the permanent workforce. And that kind of caught me by surprise. I was kind of anticipating that there could be 100 people in our community who live here now that could potentially fill those roles and thus wouldn't need any help from the housing coordinator. So I'm wondering if you could share with us any thoughts you might have on the talent that Squamish currently has as it relates to the expertise that's needed for those 100 positions, and how many might be from Squamish for those?
We don't have a count on that yet, of course, until we get into the specifics of operational workforce development. It is and will remain always our hope that as many of those employees as possible come from the community. To start up a plant of this nature, you need experienced, trained, licensed expertise. And so, of course, there's going to be a few people that will come to Squamish to operate a facility of this type. And the housing coordinator will have a role in making sure that they have places to live within the reasonable scope of your community, managing and mitigating our impact as we always have. that's like years from now. So is something that we have the opportunity to build up together, and we certainly expect to.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'll venture a few questions of my own here. So when when do you expect us to provide our formalized feedback for this step of the process?
My understanding is that on or about May 26th had been a target, but you know, certainly within a week or so, so that we can stay on our timelines and commitments to the Environmental Assessment Office would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. And what is that timeline for submitting the plan that we're commenting on?
June. Early to mid-June, depending on your timelines, Mayor.
So to me, that doesn't feel like there's much time to incorporate our feedback into the plan that you're going to submit. How do you feel with that workload, given that you've got less than a 30-day turnaround on potentially incorporating any feedback that we're providing as an organization into in a meaningful way into the plan in such a short time frame?
Knowing that we have engaged very directly with the community and with several of you in the process of like developing the plan to where it is today, and knowing how seriously we've taken all of those mitigations, we're confident that and we also have like a pretty expert and dedicated staff sitting in the in the seats here that are taking your comments and thoughts and feedback here. So we are confident that we'll be able to update the plan within that time frame, and we're really quite proud of and committed to the work that we've done so far to so comprehensively mitigate impacts on community services and infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. In your presentation, you mentioned company designated housing. Is that Toronto exclusively? Is that some other mechanism that's what that is? I just want to make sure I understand.
Sorry, I was pushing the button thinking that you were done and then you paused, and yes, that means Sirocco.
Okay, thank you. I would like to, I'll add my voice to the sentiment that this plan itself should be consulted more broadly with the public as far as the actual plan, not just the highlights. And that I think that's important, and I'm sure we'll hear about that, or you'll hear about that later in the process. But I do think that's important, a very important consideration. And there was talk, sorry, in your presentation, you mentioned around procurement policy and so on, for local sourcing and that type of thing. Is that procurement policy going to be, is that where it's captured, and is that something that's public? So how do we get some clarity on that, so our community can start sort of positioning to have access to those opportunities should they exist?
If I said policy, I'm going to apologize, because that's not the case. As we mentioned, a major subcontractor is being onboarded right now. And as you know, Flotel vendor is being onboarded. We will work very closely with them through the procurement processes to make sure that our commitments in our Squamish Nation Impact Benefit Agreement are met and respected, and to optimize opportunities for procurement from local suppliers in the community.
Okay, thank you. I might have added the policy into my question. Procurement was the question. So okay, thank you. And the mention of the new website, I think, throughout this process, around this table, we've discussed at length the challenges with the Fortis piece and the WLNG piece. And I just wondered if you've given any consideration to that web presence being forward facing, as to one landing page that can maybe split the person off depending on the nature of their inquiry, as you're developing your new web asset?
Because we're separate companies, like of course Fortis has their own website and as does Woodfibre LNG, but like it's a good idea in terms of the grievance mechanism. So let us take that away and see if that's something that's possible to like manage in a, like technological and, corporate governance way. We appreciate the thought.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Greenlaw and then Stoner, and I'm going to cap it there for this round.
Thanks. Through the chair, just to keep on about housing. Just a quick question. You mentioned your internal policy requiring that all your employees stay in the company housing. And I just, again, wanted to make sure that that policy is transcending to your contractors and subcontractors as well, that they will also only be staying in, they won't be taking up our housing stock, basically.
They will not be taking up your housing stock.
Or hotels.
Thank you. Through the chair, picking up on the impact on jobs question, your presentation spoke to prioritizing economic development, procurement opportunities for local businesses, as well as employment and training opportunities for local residents. We're like 6 months out from the ramp up, January, 3 months out from start of construction. And so I'm just curious if you can elaborate a little bit more on what those training opportunities are going to look like for our local businesses.
Sure. So my sort of preliminary response to that would be it's something that we're hoping to work collaboratively with parts of the community on. Again, certainly I know that everybody's under-resourced. Certainly you're looking at the Woodfibre team. And so we don't exactly know what that would look like, but I think it's an important conversation to have. We're trying to strike that balance between, is this a desire of the community and local residents, or is it something they'd rather not kind of entertain? And so again, really hoping to have that conversation more comprehensively with district economic development, as well as BIA, chamber, et cetera. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And again, I would say that opportunity is not limited to the next 3 to 6 months. There's going to be ongoing supply needs for the flotel, which doesn't arrive until 2024, and then depending on the stage of the project. So I think one of the things we have talked about is a supplier inventory, understanding who the businesses are, who may be interested. So we've got some work to do there, and appreciate you raising the timelines. They are important.
Yeah, I know, especially for our smaller businesses, it can be hard for them to pivot and be able to actually benefit from those sorts of opportunities. So the longer the timeline, the better. One thing that we haven't touched on in this conversation, but was part of the CSIMP plan, is the policing component, and something that we've raised ongoing is risk of strain on the current RCMP resources. And in particular, Ms. Basi, you spoke to the October 12th open house and how there were a lot of lessons learned from that experience. I think many of us were there, and there was a protest where RCMP had to respond. And I think it took a lot of us kind of by surprise and was not necessarily handled the way that we would have expected if there had been expectation of that and proper planning. And so I'm just wondering if you can speak to what were the lessons learned that Woodfibre took away from that and how we're going to work together to address them.
Sure, I'll mention a couple of things as I was the representative on site that evening, and then I'll turn it to Christine as well, as I know you've got lots to say on this. I think our key lesson learned there was, as has been mentioned several times in this room, we know that our project is controversial in this community, and so we know better now to expect and to respect that everybody needs to come out and have the ability to express their opinion. So I think we learned better how to manage in a respectful, cultural and gender inclusive way the ability for those individuals to have their voice and their say. Obviously, it was not our intention to have our CMP respond in that way, and certainly, it wasn't our intention to have that drain any of the resources where our CMP could have been used in an alternate fashion that evening. So I think our big takeaway there was to really listen and learn from those within the RCMP force that have that expertise. Again, we've implemented those monthly meetings, working with the integrated Indigenous unit, as well as the intimate partner violence representative at the force, to understand how we better respond. And I think some of you attended our previous open house that was held a number of weeks ago, and we did at that instance opt instead to give protesters their time on the floor and really show respect for their message and what they had to say. And obviously that worked a lot better for everyone involved. So that was a significant lesson learned. And so I think we'll continue to integrate those lessons learned as we go and come up with some of the future planning related to things, as you say, as protests and as we have open houses and information sharing.
The thing that I would add on that, and I mean like in absolutely no way to take anything away from like my staff and my team, of whom I'm extremely proud. I was away in Houston at the time of that particular like event that you mentioned, and so wasn't there available on the floor to kind of bring a little bit more experience with that type of thing to the proceedings. There was no need for RCMP to be called on that occasion. It happened rather, impulsively, instinctively. There were a relatively few activists with like exercising their like freedom to assemble and their like right to express to us their perspectives. Out of that event, although I wasn't there that time, I took their message extremely seriously, to heart, and developed some of the programs that we've talked about here today in response to that. So while like organizations, when they're just getting into their pattern of like holding open houses and dealing with like the flow of people and what do you do when, like some people have a point to make. We've acknowledged from the beginning that, like that was like a error that happened in the moment. It wouldn't have happened, like had we like been entirely organized for that. It hasn't happened since. And we, like welcome people of all views and respect their freedom to assemble. And that incident didn't need policing, although we always appreciate their presence in the community.
Thank you. Just further on from that, I'm just curious if protest planning and response is intended to fit under the CSIMP, the Emergency Response Management Plan, or the Traffic Management Plan, or where will we actually see some of the more robust planning that I appreciate that we don't necessarily want our CMP responding, but I think it does us all well to really think through what all the potential options or scenarios are going to be. So I'm just curious, is that in this plan or is it in a future plan that we can expect?
So what I would say for that, Councillor Stoner, is you won't see it in the level of detail that I assume yourself and council will want to see in those plans. Certainly it's reflected at a high level in terms of our priority on mitigating impacts, and it will be reflected at a very high level, not at all in detail in the emergency response plan, and it's been discussed particularly with staff that it is out of scope for that. Those of you that were on last term will recall that we had put a non-disclosure agreement in place with council, and protest planning was a topic of that non-disclosure agreement. So it's something that we would welcome a tabletop exercise with yourselves and our CMP to give you that comprehensive information. But of course, it's not necessarily something that's in detail for public consumption.
Okay. And then finally, you mentioned in your presentation, worker access to the community would not be allowed for recreational purposes, but it would be for supply purposes. So I'm just curious if you can clarify what that means and how you'll manage the two.
That means that if people are coming back and forth to, like pick up materials and supplies for procurement purposes, that then they would have an organized like purpose to do so. That like would not include like recreational access to the community. They would be coming back and forth to pick up like supplies and items from businesses on the community and take them back to the flotel.
And I would say that would be primarily while they are working, right? So it would be scheduled transportation as part of their workday. There would be no scheduled transportation provided, outside of the workday. And one of the interesting things that we have discussed briefly with economic development is if there is opportunities for, getting supplies like prescriptions or things that don't create an impact out to the flotel, I think there's an area of opportunity there. But I think one of the key distinctions, as Christine mentioned, if someone is working and it's part of their course of duty to access the community for supply purposes, but not for leisure or on an optional basis, there will be no transportation provided.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Pettingill, you can close us out.
Thanks. And just given some of the feedback today, can the public expect to be given access to the plan and an opportunity to provide feedback and some of the supporting documents that make the plan understandable?
What I would say there is that we've heard your feedback and we'll need to discuss that internally, and we will report back to council through staff.
Okay, thanks. And then just thinking back on some of the discussion, my understanding from the EAO is that the EAO is supportive and almost expecting that you and Fortis will work closely together and give us some of the more consolidated info we want. Yet what I took from your presentation is you're of the position that the EAO is prohibiting or preventing you from coming up with a comprehensive plan. So I just want clarity from your perspective. Is the EAO the obstacle that prevents a comprehensive planning for traffic and security and all these things? Or is it your own sort of corporate aspirations? And, I work for companies, they have separate reporting to shareholders, major companies, and, there's all kinds of regulatory bodies and separate plans reporting to those, but there's still overarching plans. They're able to come together, and maybe the overarching plan doesn't go to the EAO, but they can still exist. So what is the obstacle? Why are we not able to get these consolidated plans? Does the EAO have some regulation I'm not aware of that prevents this, or what is it?
Councillor, I think that you're aware that, as we stated previously, like the projects are separately regulated, and so they have to submit like separate CSIMPs and other separate regulatory instruments. However, as I also said earlier, we have worked extensively and closely between Fortis and ourselves and district staff, including through like regular processes of engagement. So I think that your question has already been answered. We do a great deal of coordination, but projects have to seek their regulatory authorizations based on their EAs. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And with that, I think we'll end our session here. Thank you so much for joining us today and your presentation and doing your best to address our questions here. So thank you. Council, we will be in recess and we'll be back in 15 minutes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for having us. We always appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you. Okay, welcome back to the special business meeting for District of Squamish. Today is May 23rd, 2023. We just finished the presentation from Woodfibre LNG on their Community Services and Infrastructure Management Plan, CSIMP. I thought what we'd do is we can go around, just do a round of comments on what we heard in the presentation to start to formalize some of the feedback that we have. And so that's what this process is going to be. I'm hoping we can get through this with one round, but maybe some clarifiers afterwards. So would someone like to get us started with that? Councillor Stoner?
Happy to. Thanks in advance for staff putting together a thorough submission to Woodfibre on their CSIMP plan. Based on what I heard in their presentation, I think I would like to raise the following points for feedback. One, that public engagement on the plan is inadequate and does not meet community expectations or the EA certificate requirement number 24. That the section on the impact on jobs, it remains unclear that their proposed mitigation efforts with regards to training, employment opportunities for local residents and businesses are actually valid given the short runway, 3 to 6 months, that they're giving until the proposed construction start date. I'll write these out for you, Melissa, if that'd be helpful. Impacts on local resources, local RCMP resources and mitigation efforts vis-a-vis protest management are woefully inadequate at this point. And that proposed mitigation actions with regards to housing presuppose the outcomes of provincial and municipal approval processes, in particular the EA amendment and the municipal TUP that's required, which undermine public confidence in regulatory processes. And I think this really needs to be highlighted. We basically just heard her say that she's convinced that she'll get the approval from the province. And I don't think that that's fair. And I think that our community that's listening, it really undermines the value of the processes that we go through. And then finally, I would like to request clarity on the number of workers that are expected to be living locally, that are expected to be hired locally, or that will be living in community, and the timeline for those workers, because I think that there's unclear expectations of when those folks will be arriving. And despite hearing that they'll be housed in Sirocco, I am unclear how many there will be relative to 96 bedrooms that are available.
Thank you. Council, who would like to go next? I don't want to start naming folks or make that the only feedback provided here. Coming up. Councillor Pettingill.
Trying to get everything so I can get it in one. So I think I think it's important just to note the framing of this. Although this is a community safety and infrastructure management plan, they did make some mentions of community priorities and also talked about a very little bit about some of their missions. But this is a fossil fuel project, a new 40-year fossil fuel project in a climate emergency. The IPCC is pretty clear. We can't have any new projects. We have to reduce existing projects, and any sequestration is required without that expansion. And so there's no model where we can expand fossil fuel and do a bit of sequestration and make it okay. But that is sort of the overarching premise or I guess context for this that we can't forget, and why there's a fair bit of scrutiny and resistance and concern about mitigations. I don't think as a community, given our community priorities and goals and the global priorities and goals, a lot of willingness to accept consequences of a project with insufficient mitigations. So I think the workforce mitigation piece has been, there aren't mitigations in place other than monitoring. And the comment I heard from them was that, well, it's a free market, so there's really nothing they can do except monitor. But that's not adequate. We heard today that they're not just going to compete for construction workers, but our restaurants and hotels are short of staff, and they said they're going to take up those people if they can for the flotel, which is just unacceptable. I think Sirocco, again, it's part of the problem. It's not part of the solution. There's the people being evicted, and it's the fact that that is not, as far as I'm aware, it was not planned or developed to be worker housing, and that's how they're using it, which is not acceptable. A colleague spoke about the assumptions or the presumption that the flotel is going to fit with provincial process or our TUP process, and that's not certain at all. There's a whole bunch of questions I still have. I think it is fair to acknowledge that it is one of the better, at least, attempts at resolving some of the concerns we've raised. But I think there's a lot of unanswered questions before we can say that this is a go. I really want to push back on, Woodfibre and Fortis both seem to be saying that they can't coordinate better, but that's just not true. Anyone's worked with big companies on big projects know you can coordinate better. You can still provide separate plans and separate proposals to your regulators. But, so I think we really have to push back on this idea that they cannot provide a consolidated traffic overview, a consolidated infrastructure management plan from both projects. Maybe the EAO doesn't want to see that. That's fine, but we need to see that. And I think we should be continue to push for that. And I think overall, the public engagement has been lacking, and I felt with the materials I had going into this meeting, I just have more and more questions. There's a very few specific mitigations they talked about, but a lot of things was just generalities. Oh, we're going to monitor, or we take this very seriously, but absolutely no concrete details and nothing to base really my comments other than to say, like, you know, I heard a few things in this presentation, but there's so many gaps. And I need that information. The public needs that information. We need the supporting documents. And until that's happened, they haven't done their engagement.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
So I'm going to try to not repeat other comments. I don't think we need I'll try not to repeat. Anyways, there's no mechanism to address the bust phase of the local employment after the construction phase. So after construction completes, we can anticipate a rise in local unemployment as those people who were employed in the construction phase will be unemployed. So I don't see a plan for that phase. The CSIMP provides an insufficient level of detail on the timeline of the proposed worker accommodation. Currently proposed construction start dates do not coincide with the timeline of the workforce accommodation, which will likely lead to unmitigated housing, accommodation, and transportation impacts. And the CSIMP provides an insufficient commitment to local RCMP resources to mitigate the potential impacts on community policing. You want me to send those?
Thank you. Council? Anyone else before I venture my own? Councillor Anderson, go ahead.
I think it was 2015. I attended a 2-day jobs fair, the largest, each of those events was extended over 2 days, was the largest of such ever held in this community, and it was hosted by WLNG. Too early, no question, because they had to put the project in the shelf for a while. But I honestly don't think that it is. I happen to know personally people in the Squamish Station community and otherwise who are setting themselves up, have been gearing themselves up to seek employment and positions in this project. So I'm not thinking that this is, if I understood one of my colleagues right, that this is too short of a period to apply oneself to this. I think that the prospect has been there for those interested. I think that I'm not so concerned, just to relate to Councillor Hannibal's comments about a bust phase. We have had a highway upgrade that involved a very large temporary workforce and a camp, in fact, and we've had camps before. And we have had the gas line came in 1990, was also a camp and a large construction workforce. But I think that a greater stress is not the workers coming and going, but on the housing picture. That has been the greater stress, not on what happens when they go or what happens to these people. I think that Ms. Kennedy did have a good point in that we do have a robust labor market for skilled people, people with trades. And I think that will be taken advantage of. So that's not a bigger concern to me. It's the housing stress as far as this cycle aspect goes. With respect to Sirocco, I happen to know that that would not have been built without the financing that was able to be secured with the Woodfibre commitment. And I think that we must take something into account. It is in everyone's interest that the permanent workforce be stable and local and well-housed. And that is in everyone's interest. That is going to be a complex plant to operate. There's going to need to be very highly skilled and highly trained and committed people that we hope will not be coming and going, but will stay here. So I think it's in everyone's interest that that initiative was taken to secure housing at the Sirocco site or otherwise for supervisory and managerial and technical staff. That's very important. And it's been a lesson learned at an LNG plant elsewhere. I don't need to go into the detail of it, but it's going to be a complex plant, demanding roles for those types of people. looking after housing for them was a very important initiative. Tourism is mentioned in the staff notes that tourism might be added to, impact on tourism sector, potential negative impact on tourism sector associated with large-scale construction projects. I would suggest to staff to clarify what aspect, and I would assume that we're considering the housing aspect of impact on tourism. You could go in any number of directions, but clarify to add some nuance to what is meant by that is my suggestion. I think that I'll go back to the jobs, and there is a comment here about the quote, it's under 5.2, quality of life and sustainable development. Host or participate in local jobs and regional fairs prior to construction. Well, I've already mentioned there are two major events. They were huge, and the whole Sea to Sky Hotel taken up by them. And as a risk for other local employers, well, I think, again, Ms. Kennedy made a valid point that excuse me.
So, Councillor, we just want to keep our comments to the presentation we had from WLNG and not speak to, just try to stay on that path if we could.
I'll wrap it up there then, Mayor Herford. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greenlaw.
Thanks. Yeah, just to sum up some of my thoughts and not to Jesus. Anyways, okay. There's no direct language stating that Woodfibre LNG will take responsibility for the contractors and subcontractors, which I think will be a key component in the implementation of their policies, and I would like to see some stronger language around that. Okay. I'm just talking. And I do think that the construction timeline seems like overly optimistic. I'd like to see, I have some concerns that there will not be room for feedback from the public or the incorporation of the feedback given around this table today. So those are my main comments.
Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll just add to this conversation that I think district staff have done an excellent job of pushing for answers, pushing for the best interest of our community, and asking the tough questions, and I would expect that they'll continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to venture mine, and then we'll go back to you, Councillor Pettingill. I think throughout this, let's say this whole process doesn't quite sum up sort of my time working on this file over the 4.5 years of being elected official and and a member of our community prior to that. And a lot of these issues are still that we've been talking about since day one aren't adequately addressed. And in very broad sense, for our engagement submitted by our feedback to be provided by the end of the week here on the 26th, I believe was the date, and for them to submit the plan incorporating that feedback in under 30 days, there's no way. It's wholly inadequate engagement with us, with the community, through us, to actually be impactful in the plan, which is the whole point of having meetings and engaging. Isn't to run up the scorecard, it's to engage, it's to listen, and it's to address the concerns. And I simply don't know how that happens in the timeline that was laid out here for us today. The same goes for the public engagement. And we heard that the EAO office will be the deciders of whether that engagement was sufficient, as what we heard from our presenters today. And I think it's absolutely appropriate that we add our opinion to that. I know that I don't feel as engaged as I would like to be around this table. given those timelines I just spoke about. And I would say would be absolutely reasonable for a member of the public to feel that they weren't adequately engaged with in this process. And I'd like our comments to reflect that. Councillor Penningill, do you have something?
Yeah, just a point of clarification from something mentioned by one of my colleagues. And as far as I've heard, and I think we have heard, Sirocco is only at this point secured for short-term construction period housing. It's temporary workforce housing. It is not, I've not heard any sort of plans about longer-term employee housing. I haven't of any sort. And so I don't think that has even actually been a topic of discussion of long-term employment housing.
Okay, thank you. Now, we've had our comments, and Melissa's been doing her best. I'm stretching this out to let you finish that note, to compile them. Was there anything conflicting in there? I heard general alignment. There's a few little sticking points. Is there anything that you'd like more clarity on to formalize this, or do we have enough to work with for now?
I think we can look back at the video to confirm there weren't any sticking points that I heard for sure, but I have most people's comments here.
Okay, we can verify offline that everything's good there. Okay. Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious if staff can speak to process, if they intend to just take the comments that they heard today and return those back to Woodfibre, or if this is something that council would see again. I'm just curious what the process would be.
Through the chair, the planned process was that we would take all the feedback from council along with all the rest of the feedback from staff, amalgamate it, and then submit it to WLNG. Is there a different process requested?
I wonder if it could just be brought forward as a memo on a future council agenda, just so that we're all familiar with what gets submitted.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Penningill.
Would it be normal or appropriate for staff to share a copy of our with the EAO? I guess I'm not fully confident, given in the presentation I saw today, that all of our comments will be translated into what Woodfibre then turns over to the EAO, and I would like the EAO to see our actual community's comments. Does that require a resolution, or was that something that staff would just sort of do given the broader context of this? Or
Thank you, through the chair. My understanding is that the comments would go straight to the EAO, but I could be incorrect, so I don't want to speak out of turn. In which case, do we need a motion? You want
to? Yeah, so through the chair. So the process is, the current process is, and the EAO process is that we provide that feedback to WLNG to provide that with and submit it with their CSIMP to the EAO. It would be a different process if we are looking to also provide our feedback directly to the EAO.
I'm going to just venture my opinion here. I think when we see the document that's finally submitted, I think that's where there's opportunity for us as a council to provide feedback on what was submitted directly to the EAO. And given that the timelines as presented to us were quite short, I think that those two periods of time, the one that you're concerned about between now and them submitting a plan and what if it represents our comments and actually commenting on what they've submitted, I think are effectively the same given this accelerated, what I feel is an accelerated timeline that they're presenting. So I don't know what you'd like to do with that, but Councillor Bendigo.
So just for clarity, though, my understanding is that Woodfibre would in the normal process take our comments, do whatever, and then submit something to the EAO. We wouldn't necessarily see what Woodfibre submitted to the EAO, which is my concern, which is why I just wonder proactively if we CC the EAO with our comments, or do we have that validation piece to make sure that our full comments, sort of unedited, were shared with the EAO?
So yeah, go ahead, Ms. Bengi.
Through the chair, the process is then the EAO would, and I imagine if it follows the same process that it has been for our Fortis plans, is that the EAO then provides that information back to us on what was shared, what their assessment was, and how the proponent is addressing those concerns. So in the past, we have received a copy of all of our feedback back with the comments from the proponents on how they are addressing it as well.
And this happens before the EAO makes their decision, so we have a chance to sort of raise a concern if...
Yes. So in the past, in the previous session, we had 2 opportunities with the EAO to discuss what the proponent had submitted and our concerns, if we had any concerns about mitigation or non-mitigation of those actions.
Okay, that alleviates my concerns then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Council, I think that concludes our this chapter of our meeting here today. So next up, we have a motion to close. Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Stoner. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And we'll be in recess. How long do we need for that? Do you need 5, 10? Okay, don't go far. Thank you.